fact that they were an enemy. Now, I didn't word this any differently than, you know, I want to destroy my enemy, and I said the person's name. Like, I didn't say, oh, I want us to become friends, oh, I want us to get together. That's the way it kind of worked out. And, you know, it's nice when things work out that way. It's not always going to happen. But I think that all magic, because we're talking about cause and effect, in many senses it follows the path of least resistance. So if there is common ground to just destroy the enemy capacity and to connect with someone, then I think that if that's the path of least resistance, then that's what's going to happen. You know, if you, just to take it out of this realm, for example, if you do a ritual to get money, and you are conceivably up for a promotion at your job, or you're conceivably up for, you know, a chance to, you know, I write, so like when I have a short story out there that could be purchased, for example, or something like that, then that's probably the path that it's going to take. Because, you know, you're not just going to have like ghosts show up in the middle of the night with bags of cash and throw them at your feet. That's never going to happen. It has to manifest itself in reality somehow, and it's always going to do that by the easiest possible route. So we have to basically ask ourselves what we think an enemy means for us as individuals. This is interesting if we look at this in biblical terms, because, you know, literally this is where we get the idea of Satan from. It's the Hebrew word for adversary. So we're essentially referring to someone who is essentially opposed to whatever we're trying to do. And if you look at the names of devils and demons throughout history, they're usually the perversions of the gods of some other people. A lot of the time, the Babylonians and the Akkadians and stuff like that. You see their gods sort of re-imaged as demons in the later biblical systems. So this is all like, I'm not trying to like tell anyone how to think of their enemy or what to think of an enemy is or anything like that. But that's the question. I think that's a fundamental question that this just having access to this kind of magic asks people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about practical aspects here for a minute. If we have no other questions about the ethical situation. Oh. So practically speaking, there's three sort of major ways that you can work this kind of system. There's what I call the sympathetic connection, which is takes major advantage of what we would call, what I referred to before with the astral light and the magical link. And that's about trying to, like, this is sort of like what your traditional voodoo kind of stuff would be, finding a personal artifact that connects to the target, or finding an image that connects to the target, something that has a relationship with the person that you're trying to involve your magic with. This doesn't just have to be with something that they've actually owned or anything like that. You can have a personal connection by developing a sigil. You can use the Agrippa's planetary tables or the Rose Cross and the Golden Dawn to just spell out someone's name and turn it into a linear design. If someone's going to do that, I would suggest a certain amount of concentration on that image first, just to think about the target, think about the intentions of the ritual, and just focus on the image for as much period of time. And try to, if you've done any exercises in like Raja Yoga or Bhakti Yoga, those would be very helpful to just try to engage the image and block out everything else and focus on the intent. And to do that long enough that the image becomes significantly imbued with the idea of the target and the idea of the ritual. At that point, I would say that somehow this has to be brought into contact with the target. So, you know, traditional methods are usually to put it in the threshold of someone's doorway, so they're passing over top of it, or someplace where they sleep, or someplace where they eat, somewhere where someone's natural defenses are seen to be down, where they're relaxed. You know, the act of taking a meal is kind of one of those things where we seclude ourselves off and we kind of relax ourselves, we're less aware of what's going on around us. Sleep is obvious. Or where someone watches TV is probably good because they're tranced out. And after that, it's pretty. This method is kind of like allows for the most creative variation, because really it's whatever ritual formula sort of will get up the right enthusiasm, get up the right energy in the person operating the ceremony. It can be very personal. It can be very scripted. There's a lot of room to maneuver. Usually it's good to have some kind of physical object to destroy it, like a wax image of the person. It doesn't have to be like great or anything, just something that conceivably represents the individual in question, or a picture of them, or if you can get physical material like hair, fingernails, those are good. The second major way is the demons of the Goetia, or any demon in general. They're usually pretty good at stuff like that. That's fairly straightforward. The Goetia is easy to use in that its operating system is very clear and very well defined, and in spite of the fact that people talk about it like it's dangerous and worry about it like it's dangerous, I think that as long as people follow the instructions, they don't have anything to worry about. So when they get cute and start messing around with the system is when problems happen, and I think I always advise against people doing that. The demon does all the work, more or less, but they're going to want something in return. And I think it's very important. There are certain people out there, when they talk about using these kind of systems, they tell people, oh, you shouldn't give them anything, your own authority should be enough, just tell them what to do, blah, blah, blah. And I always tell people, honor your debts. And don't mess around, because if you don't give them something, then they're going to take whatever they feel like they deserve, and they are perfectly capable of doing that. So that's the only time that it becomes problematic or dangerous, I would say. The only other thing about that is I wouldn't phrasing the actual interaction with the spirit for one request. I've never gotten too specific when I've done this myself. I find that it helps. As I said before, magic likes to follow the path of least resistance, the easiest way to manifest one's result. So if you make it too specific, it makes it a lot harder for it to happen. And you'll also be dealing with your own authority versus the authority of the target in question. I believe Aleister Crowley mentioned this in Magic Without Tears when he talks about how it would be easy to throw a curse at a bank teller or something like that. I don't think that's the example he used, but the other one he used was Madame Curie. Much easier to throw it at the bank teller because there's only a certain amount of people whose fates and their wills and their intents are wrapped up in the bank teller and the bank teller's life. So they only have a certain amount of weight in the astral light, so to speak. Whereas Madame Curie, inventor of medicines, researcher, scientist, she's impacted the course of human development. So someone trying to throw a hex or a curse at her is going to have a lot harder of a time to do it because she's on a certain trajectory. So there are going to be certain people that you're not going to be able to affect one way or the other. You might be able to get them out of your life, or get your life out of them is probably more likely the way it's going to happen if they're on that trajectory. You're not going to knock them off it. Your only course is to essentially get out of the way. And that's an interesting thing to think about, and it's an interesting thing to do, because one thing that people don't do a lot is when they do rituals and they don't work, they don't explore the reasons why too much. They just kind of leave it aside that they don't work, and that's just bad research, essentially. Like if someone does an experiment and they find out that it didn't produce the result that they intended it to produce, the best thing to do is go in and find out what went wrong. And there's no shortage of spirits that can provide this kind of information, particularly in the Goetia. I know I go on about the Goetia a lot, but it's because it is one of the most straightforward ways, and it's one of the easiest ways to actually know whether you're getting a result or not. Because if you're conjuring a spirit, it's pretty direct. There's either a spirit there or there's not. I mean, you might not physically see it, but it's pretty hard to miss. So it's not like if you do an act of sympathetic magic, it might be questionable. You might even, and thinking back to the first time that I ever used this kind of stuff, I never found out what happened to the person, simply because I just never saw them again. They never came into my life. As far as I know, they were fine. And I was living in a fairly small town, in a fairly isolated area, so it's very rare to not see somebody after a certain amount of time. You're sort of used to running into everybody all the time. And I continued to live there for, I think, 3 or 4 years after this happened without ever running into that person again.
What's an example of the sort of thing that you will ask for?
Well, it depends. Sometimes it's monetary kind of stuff. Like they like jewels. They like